The crew aboard the Hope was silent. Each person sat at their station, trying to focus on their tasks, but no one could shake the feeling that something huge was coming. The ship, humanity's last hope for survival, drifted through the cold emptiness of space, heading toward the unknown. Captain Darnell stood alone in the war room, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The vastness of space stretched out before him, and yet he felt a strange weight pressing on his shoulders. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but something heavier, something that felt like the world was waiting for him to make a choice that would decide everything. He knew the stakes. They all did. The alien fleet was close, very close, too close, in fact. The crew had been tracking their movements for days, but now that they were within range, things felt different. The transmission they had received earlier still echoed in the minds of everyone aboard. The alien commander's mocking words had shaken them to their core. "You think this fragile ship is a threat to us?" The voice had taunted. "We'll turn your planet to dust in a matter of hours. Your kind doesn't belong in this galaxy." The aliens had laughed. That laugh was still fresh in everyone's memory. It wasn't just the sound of mockery. It was the sound of a certainty that they were unbeatable. But now, in the stillness of space, as the Hope floated like a tiny speck in a sea of stars, there was no sign of the alien fleet. Only the occasional flicker of distant stars, and the hum of the ship's systems broke the silence. It was almost peaceful. Too peaceful. The calm was deceptive, and Captain Darnell knew it. He could feel it in his bones. This quiet would not last. The storm was coming. He turned away from the view screen and walked slowly to the central command panel, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The crew was still preparing for battle, but there was an air of helplessness in the way they moved. They knew what the captain was thinking. They had heard the transmission too. No one truly believed they could win against the overwhelming force the aliens commanded. The plan was simple. At least, that's what Darnell had told them. They would have to fight, even though the odds were nearly impossible. It wasn't just the aliens' numbers that were intimidating. It was their technology, advanced in ways humanity couldn't even understand. Their ships were enormous, their weapons far beyond anything Earth had ever created. They had the firepower to obliterate anything in their path. And here they were, a single warship against a fleet that could destroy a planet without even breaking a sweat. As Darnell gazed at the control panel, his hand hovered over the button that would initiate the next phase of the mission. It was a weapon, a new type of weapon, that no one aboard the Hope had fully understood. Only a few people, including the captain, knew what it was capable of. The crew had been briefed that it was humanity's last line of defense, but there had been no demonstrations, no trials. It was as if they were all walking into this battle blindfolded. Captain Darnell was no different, but he had to believe. He had to trust in the plan, even if it seemed like a desperate gamble. There was no turning back now. Behind him, Lieutenant Sarah, the ship's weapons officer, broke the silence. "Captain, we're getting strange readings from their fleet," she said, her voice tight with unease. Darnell turned to face her. Sarah was staring at the screens, her fingers flying over the controls. Her face was a mask of concentration, but even she couldn't hide the hint of fear in her eyes. "They're moving into position. It looks like they're preparing to strike." Darnell nodded slowly. The calm before the storm had ended. The aliens were making their move. "We're ready," he said, though the words didn't feel convincing. He turned to face the rest of the crew, who were watching him expectantly. They all knew this moment had come. They all knew this might be the last time they would see each other alive. There was a heavy silence in the room as Darnell walked to the front, his mind racing with the decisions he had made and the choices still to come. He couldn't afford to falter. Not now. "All right, everyone," Darnell said, his voice firm. "Let's make history." His words were meant to inspire, but they only made the crew more nervous. They were unsure whether the captain truly believed they could win or if he was simply trying to keep their spirits up. No one could tell. The fear was there, hanging thick in the air. No matter how hard they tried to push it away, it remained, gnawing at their thoughts. Suddenly, an alarm went off, cutting through the tension. Darnell's hand flew to the console, his eyes snapping to the screen. A red warning light blinked on the display, and a voice came over the intercom. Enemy fleet detected. All crew to battle stations. The calm was gone. The storm had arrived. The crew scrambled into action. The ship's weapon systems hummed to life, and the sound of footsteps running echoed through the corridors as everyone rushed to their posts. Darnell stood still for a moment, watching them. He felt the weight of his responsibility on his shoulders more than ever. He had led them to this point, and now it was time for them to either rise or fall. No more calm. No more waiting. The battle was about to begin. As the Hope prepared for its final stand, the stars outside seemed to fade away. The alien fleet was close, and every second felt like an eternity. The crew of the Hope had made their peace with what was coming. They were ready to fight. They had no other choice. The storm was here, and humanity's last hope would either turn the tide or be swept away in its wake. The crew aboard the Hope moved with a sense of quiet urgency. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a nervous energy that hung in the air, thick and palpable. Each person tried to focus on their duties, but no one could completely shake off the feeling that the calm they were experiencing was only temporary. The ship, Earth's last line of defense, drifted silently through the vast, dark expanse of space, headed straight toward the alien fleet that had mocked them so mercilessly. Captain Darnell sat in the war room, alone, eyes fixed on the massive view screen in front of him. The stars outside appeared to twinkle with an almost false sense of peace, but he knew better. The quiet wasn't a sign of safety. It was the calm before the storm. His mind raced as he thought of the transmission they had received earlier. The alien commander's voice still echoed in his ears, that laugh, full of scorn, full of certainty, ringing through the ship's comms. "Your ship is a joke," the alien had said. "You are nothing but ants in the eyes of our fleet." Darnell clenched his fists. They were underestimating humanity, and that was their mistake. But it didn't change the fact that they were outmatched, outnumbered. They had no chance against the aliens' superior technology, their massive ships, and weapons that could wipe them off the map in a blink of an eye. Despite all the odds, the Hope was still humanity's last stand. The ship was small, nothing compared to the alien armada, but it was equipped with something no one else in the galaxy had. A secret weapon, a last-ditch effort to defend Earth. Only a handful of people, including the captain, truly understood how it worked. There had been no trials, no tests, just a quiet belief that it would work when they needed it most. But how could they be sure? No one knew, not even Darnell. And now, with the alien fleet so close, the question was no longer if the weapon would work, but whether it would be enough. The crew continued their preparations, but the air was thick with doubt. They all knew what was coming. The alien fleet was almost in range. The tension was unbearable. Lieutenant Sarah, the weapons officer, was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly as she checked the sensors. "Captain, the alien fleet is moving into position. They're surrounding us." Darnell turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the pressure rising, could almost hear the pounding of his own heartbeat in his ears. "Captain," she repeated, this time with more urgency. "They're about to strike." Darnell took a deep breath. "Prepare the ship," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady, trying to keep the crew from seeing the worry that flickered in his eyes. "Activate the defense systems. Get everyone to their stations." The calm before the storm had ended. Now, it was only a matter of time before the battle began. He turned back to the view screen. The alien ships were getting closer, their enormous forms filling the screen. Darnell couldn't help but feel a wave of awe at their size and power. They looked unstoppable. But that's what the aliens had thought about the Hope as well. The weapon they had installed, The one that could level the playing field was their only hope, the only thing that could possibly turn the tide in their favor. He stood in front of the control panel, running his hands over the cold metal. The weapon wasn't tested. They hadn't had time to test it. The crew didn't know what to expect, but they had to trust in it. Darnell had to trust in it. His hand hovered over the activation button. It was now or never. He wasn't sure if it would work. He wasn't even sure if they would survive the first wave. But there was no going back. It was the only chance they had. His thoughts were interrupted as the ship suddenly lurched, a low rumble vibrating through the walls. The aliens had fired their first shot. All hands, brace for impact. Darnell shouted, his voice echoing through the ship. A massive explosion rocked the hull of the Hope, and the crew scrambled to hold onto their stations. On the view screen, the alien fleet was closing in fast. The first wave of attacks had begun, and the ship was already taking hits. Darnell felt a cold rush of adrenaline. They were in the fight now. But even as the first blast reverberated through the ship, a small part of him still wondered if they were truly ready. The weapon had to work. There was no other option. Seconds turned into minutes, but to the crew, it felt like hours. The quiet was gone, replaced by the shriek of alarms, the hiss of emergency seals, and a constant thrum of the Hope's engines as they pushed forward into the heart of the storm. Darnell's mind raced as he scanned the ship's systems. "Prepare for the next phase," he ordered. There was no more time to wait. They were already deep in the enemy's grasp. It was now or never. The weapon would either save them, or they would fall. The crew had no illusions anymore. They knew that this was a fight to the death, and only one side would survive. Darnell gritted his teeth. There was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. He hit the button. The air in the Hope was thick with tension as the crew braced for impact. The ship shuddered under the weight of the alien assault. Explosions rang through the hull, and the lights flickered with each shockwave that rocked the vessel. It was as if the whole ship was holding its breath. Every second, the situation grew more dire. Alien ships filled the view screen, massive and foreboding, their sleek, dark forms almost mocking in their perfection. They moved with chilling precision, and their weaponry, beyond anything humanity had ever seen, was tearing into the Hope with relentless force. The ship groaned as another blast hit, the sound echoing through the corridors like the wail of some dying creature. Captain Darnell stood rigid, watching the chaos unfold on the screen. His knuckles were white as he gripped the console. There was no time for second thoughts now. There was no time for hesitation. This was it. Their last chance. The Hope had been designed for moments like this. The weapon was their ace in the hole, the one thing the aliens could never have predicted. But even with all their preparations, Darnell could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. What if it didn't work? What if their last hope was nothing more than a glowing promise that could never come to life? He had no answers. Only time would tell. "Prepare the weapon," Darnell barked, turning to his crew. The sound of his voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the tension. Lieutenant Sarah, at the weapons console, hesitated for only a split second before her hands flew over the controls. Her face was pale, but her eyes were locked on the task at hand, doing what she had trained for all her life. She wasn't the only one who felt the pressure, but they all knew this moment could decide everything. If the weapon failed, if they didn't find a way to stop the alien fleet, Earth was done. Humanity's future would be wiped out in the blink of an eye. "Charging," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to break through. "Power levels are stable. We're ready." Darnell exhaled slowly, as though he'd been holding his breath the entire time. This was the moment that could either turn the tide or end it all. "Fire," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. With a sudden, blinding flash, the weapon activated. A shockwave of energy surged through the Hope as a beam of pure, crackling power shot from the ship's forward cannon, aiming straight for the closest alien vessel. It was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. The weapon pulsed with an eerie light, almost alive, like it was feeding on the desperation and hope of everyone aboard. It tore through space, a streak of brilliance in the darkness, and hit the alien ship dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. The alien vessel remained intact, its shields holding firm against the attack. The crew watched in stunned silence. Darnell's heart pounded in his chest. "Is it working?" he demanded, his voice barely a whisper. Lieutenant Sarah looked back at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. And then, boom, the alien ship erupted in a massive explosion, the energy beam having done its work in ways that no one could have predicted. The vessel cracked apart, pieces of its once invulnerable hull disintegrating into space dust, vanishing into the void like a bad dream. The crew stared in disbelief, their eyes wide with shock. The weapon had worked, but not just in the way they had hoped. It didn't just damage the ship, it obliterated it. Did we just do that?" Sarah whispered, still in awe. Darnell didn't have time to answer. The alien fleet, now alerted to the power of the Hope's weapon, retaliated in full force. More blasts rained down, and the ship shuddered again. This time, it was more intense, more chaotic. But the Hope wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. "Keep firing," Darnell commanded, his voice more confident now, filled with a new sense of urgency. "We have them on the ropes. Don't stop." Another pulse of energy shot from the weapon. And this time, 2 alien ships were caught in the blast. Both exploded in spectacular fashion, leaving behind only debris and glowing remnants. The crew watched in awe as the power of humanity's last weapon began to unfold in ways they hadn't dared to imagine. With each blast, the aliens' confidence began to waver. The laughing, the arrogance, the belief that humanity was weak. It all crumbled in the face of the Hope's devastating assault. For the first time in this battle, the aliens weren't in control anymore. The Hope had taken the fight to them. But as much as the crew was celebrating their small victories, Darnell knew this wasn't over. The alien fleet had seen the destruction, and now they would retaliate with everything they had. The fight was far from won, and the weapon's power wasn't unlimited. They couldn't keep firing forever. The aliens still outnumbered them, and their advanced technology was not easily outmatched. Darnell's mind raced as he calculated their next move. They needed more time. Time to finish the job. "We've got to hold them off long enough to finish what we started," Darnell said, pacing quickly back and forth. "Sarah, can you target their command ship? Take out their leadership. That's the key to breaking their will." Sarah didn't hesitate. "On it, Captain." As the weapon recharged, the crew of the Hope worked together with newfound determination. The enemy was no longer laughing. They were scared. For the first time, the alien ships hesitated. They began to retreat, their once formidable formation faltering, as the Hope continued to fire. Captain Darnell stood tall, watching the alien fleet's reaction. They had underestimated humanity's will to survive. They had underestimated Earth. The tide of battle shifted before their eyes. For the first time since the aliens had arrived, the Hope was no longer the hunted. It was the hunter. The alien ships, once so confident in their superiority, faltered. There was fear now in their movements. They hesitated. Their flawless, calculated maneuvers became more erratic as the Hope's weapon tore through their fleet, each shot pushing them back further. The once mighty alien armada was being reduced to burning wreckage and debris, and still the Hope pushed forward, its energy weapon charging again for another strike. Captain Darnell felt a surge of adrenaline, but he couldn't afford to be distracted. The victory was far from certain. They had taken down several of the alien ships, but there were still many left. The aliens had more resources, more advanced technology, and their fleet still outnumbered humanity's lone ship. The weapon's energy pulse was powerful, but it wasn't infinite. It had a limit. Darnell knew that with every shot, they were draining the ship's power reserves, and if they didn't finish the job soon, they might be left defenseless. "How long until the weapon is ready again?" Darnell asked, turning to Sarah, who was monitoring the weapon's power levels. She was sweating, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. "Another minute, Captain," she said, her voice tight. "We've drained a lot of energy, but we can still fire, just not as often. I'll need to power down some systems to keep it stable." The captain's eyes flicked to the view screen, where the alien fleet was now regrouping. The remaining ships had formed a loose formation, their previously flawless coordination now showing signs of disruption. They were clearly trying to figure out what was happening, how the Hope, this tiny human warship, had become such a formidable force. The alien fleet was trying to adapt, but it was clear they didn't understand the weapon's true power. They didn't know how to deal with it. And that, Darnell realized, was their mistake. The aliens had underestimated humanity, believing that their technology alone would guarantee victory. They had believed that the Hope was nothing more than a symbol of desperation, a doomed vessel with no hope of making a difference. They had laughed at humanity. But now, the laughter was gone. It was replaced with confusion and fear. Darnell looked back at his crew, who were all working tirelessly. Each person was doing their part to hold the ship together, to keep the battle going. They had rallied in a way that no one had expected. The weapon had worked beyond their wildest expectations, but now they needed one last push. They had to break the alien will, crush their morale completely. "Target their command ship," Darnell ordered, his voice calm but urgent. "We hit them there, and they'll scatter. Without leadership, they won't be able to coordinate their attacks." Sarah nodded and began inputting the new coordinates, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. The view screen zoomed in on the largest alien ship, a massive command vessel that floated in the center of the fleet. It was the heart of the alien armada, and without it, the remaining ships would be like a body without a head. This was their moment. "Firing in 10 seconds, Sarah said, her voice steadied despite the tension in the air. Darnell felt a flash of hope, real hope, for the first time since this nightmare began. They were going to win. He couldn't afford to believe anything else. This would be the turning point. This would be the moment the aliens would realize they had lost. The energy weapon, glowing bright against the dark void of space, surged once more. The ship hummed with power as it prepared for the final strike. The seconds ticked by slowly, agonizingly, until Sarah shouted, "Now!" A brilliant beam shot from the Hope, racing toward the alien command ship. For a moment, it looked like the blast would miss. But then, at the last second, the beam hit its target with a deafening, shuddering explosion. The alien ship shook violently as the beam cracked through its shields, sending shockwaves through the rest of the fleet. The command vessel didn't just explode, it disintegrated. A giant burst of light consumed it, and in its place, there was nothing but debris and glowing fragments. The remaining alien ships, now without a leader, began to scatter. Their formations crumbled, and chaos broke out among them. Some ships tried to flee, while others attempted to regroup, but they were no longer coordinated. The command ship had been their backbone, and now, without it, their entire fleet was in disarray. Darnell watched as the last of the alien ships tried to make their retreat, but it was too late. The Hope had already gained the upper hand. "We've done it," Sarah said softly, staring at the view screen in disbelief. "They're breaking off. They're retreating." Darnell let out a breath he didn't even realize he'd been holding. He stood there for a moment, frozen in time. The fight wasn't over. There were still alien ships out there, still some remaining forces, but the battle was won. They had done what seemed impossible. They had struck back, not just with force, but with ingenuity and determination. "Prepare for any last-minute counterattacks," Darnell said, his voice now steady, filled with a quiet confidence. "But get ready to jump back to Earth. We've done enough damage. Let's bring our people home." The crew responded in unison, moving with urgency as they began to stabilize the ship and prepare for the jump. The energy weapon had drained nearly all their power, and the ship was on the edge of collapse. But they had won. They had stopped the alien fleet. Earth was safe, for now. As the Hope limped back toward Earth, its engines flickering and its hull scarred from the battle, Darnell stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at what they had accomplished. Humanity had been written off as weak, as insignificant, but the Hope had proven them wrong. And now, the galaxy would know that humanity was not to be underestimated. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, Darnell allowed himself to hope. They had survived, and for the first time in a long while, humanity had won. The alien fleet was retreating, but Captain Darnell knew better than to let his guard down. The battle had been hard-fought, but it wasn't over. The crew of the Hope had scored a victory, yes, but the war was still on the horizon. There were no guarantees that the alien forces wouldn't regroup, that they wouldn't return in greater numbers, or with more advanced weapons. Humanity had just given them a glimpse of what they were capable of, but Darnell was acutely aware that the aliens would not forget this fight. The command bridge of the Hope was quiet for the first time in hours, the chaos of battle giving way to an eerie, exhausted stillness. The crew, still in shock over their victory, moved like ghosts through the ship's corridors, tending to their wounds and stabilizing the systems. No one was celebrating yet. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of what they had just been through, and the realization that this was just the beginning. As Darnell stood at the helm, staring at the view screen, the distant stars seemed to mock him. They had saved Earth, this time. But how long would it last? How long before the aliens returned with a vengeance? The victory had come at a steep cost. The ship was battered, its systems malfunctioning in several places. The weapon, though devastating, had drained much of their energy, and now the crew was forced to conserve power until they could return to Earth and replenish their resources. But the most significant cost had been the lives lost. Many of their comrades, those who had fought beside them, were gone. "Captain," Lieutenant Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. She had come to stand next to him, her face pale but her eyes burning with resolve. "The alien fleet is still in disarray. We've taken down their command ship, and their remaining ships are scattered. We should have enough time to make our way back to Earth. It'll be a rough journey, but we can make it." Darnell nodded slowly, his hand resting on the console. "How long do we have until they regroup?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "It's hard to say," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the data on her screen. "They'll need time to regroup, to figure out what just happened. We've caught them off guard, but they won't forget this. We're not out of the woods yet, sir." "I know," Darnell said, his gaze never leaving the view of space outside. The stars were beautiful, distant, and cold, but now they were a reminder of the danger that lay beyond, the danger that could wipe them out in an instant. "Have we sent a message to Earth?" Darnell asked after a beat. He hadn't allowed himself to think about Earth during the battle, too focused on surviving the moment. But now that the immediate threat had passed, he couldn't help but wonder about the people they had been fighting for. Sarah nodded. "We've sent out a transmission. They know we fought off the aliens, but we haven't gone into the details yet. We need to get back before we can really explain what happened. We're too far out to communicate effectively, but we're working on it." Darnell sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on him once more. The victory was theirs, but it felt hollow when he thought about all the lives lost, his crew, Earth's civilians, the unknown cost of the alien assault. They had won, but only by the thinnest of margins. "We're going back home," Darnell said finally, his voice low but firm. "We need to make sure Earth is ready for whatever comes next. This war is far from over." With that, he turned toward the crew. "Prepare for the jump back to Earth. We've done our part, but now we need to prepare for what's coming. I don't want any surprises when we get back." The crew nodded, each person moving with a sense of urgency. Everyone had their tasks, and no one was wasting any time. Sarah returned to her station, ensuring the ship's systems were stable enough for the jump. Darnell watched as they worked, all of them driven by the same singular goal: to make it back home. As the final preparations were made, Darnell walked down the corridor, his boots echoing in the silence of the ship. The battle might have been won, but he knew that this victory would only be temporary. The aliens would come again, stronger, more prepared. The weapon the Hope had unleashed could only be used so many times before it drained the ship's power completely. But there was no turning back. Humanity had made its stand, and it had been enough. For now. But deep down, Darnell couldn't shake the thought that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The aliens had laughed at them. Now, the universe would know their name. But there were countless other alien races out there, waiting, watching. And they were all asking the same question: was humanity truly ready for the war that was coming? As he looked out into the cold, unfeeling stars, Captain Darnell didn't have an answer. He could only prepare for whatever came next, because this fight, this war, was far from over. And next time, humanity would be ready. He had to believe that. The journey back to Earth was long and silent. The Hope limped through the vast emptiness of space, its engines sputtering weakly as they pushed forward. The crew was exhausted, physically and mentally drained from the battle, but there was no time for rest. They had won, yes, but the cost was already clear. They had barely escaped with their lives, and even as they made their way back home, the knowledge that the aliens would soon return haunted them all. Captain Darnell stood alone in the observation deck, staring out at the endless stretch of space. The stars were distant, cold, and indifferent, yet they were the only thing that had remained constant in this war. In the distance, Earth glowed faintly, a small blue dot in the vastness of the universe. His home, humanity's home. And now, it was all that stood between the aliens and total conquest. Darnell couldn't help but think about the future. The victory they had achieved wasn't enough to guarantee humanity's survival. The aliens had already shown their ruthlessness, their ability to wipe out entire fleets with little effort. Earth had been spared, for now, but that didn't mean they were safe. The battle had only bought them time. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had settled deep in his bones. The Hope was barely operational. The weapon that had saved them had drained most of the ship's power reserves. The crew had done what they could to repair the systems, but there was only so much they could do with limited resources. They couldn't fight another battle like this. Not without help. Not without reinforcements. "Captain," the voice came from behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Sarah standing at the door, her expression serious but focused. "We're approaching Earth's atmosphere. We'll be able to communicate with command soon." Darnell nodded, his mind still on the battle. "I'm listening. They'll want to know everything. How we held them off, what weapons we used, what we learned about their fleet," she said, stepping forward and standing beside him. "It'll take time to process all of it. The weapon, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. We need to figure out how it works and how to replicate it before they return." Darnell turned his gaze back to Earth. He knew she was right. The weapon had been a miracle. But even miracles had their limits. We need to rebuild. Fast. We need to prepare for the next fight, because I don't think this is over. Not by a long shot. There was a pause as Sarah seemed to consider his words. "The others, do you think they'll be ready?" "They'll have to be," Darnell replied. "If humanity is going to survive this, we need to stand together." This victory, it wasn't just a win for the Hope. It was a win for everyone on Earth. But we can't afford to get complacent. The aliens will be back. They're not going to stop just because we landed a few blows. Sarah nodded, her jaw set with resolve. "We'll be ready. We have to be." As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the communication system powered up. Darnell could feel the weight of the moment. Earth was only a few hours away now. The people below, those who had no idea how close they had come to losing everything, would need to know what had happened. They needed to understand the gravity of the situation, that the war was just beginning. But as important as that was, Darnell knew there was something even more urgent. Humanity had to unite. There couldn't be division. There couldn't be doubt. The survival of their species depended on it. The comms officer, Lieutenant Peters, broke into Darnell's thoughts. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." "Put it through," Darnell ordered, his voice steady. The screen flickered, and moments later, the face of General Hawk, Earth Command's leader, appeared. His expression was hard to read, stressed but controlled. Behind him were several other military personnel, some of whom Darnell recognized. They were all waiting for answers. The general spoke first. "Captain Darnell," General Hawk said, his voice grave, "we've been tracking your progress. We've heard about the battle, but we need details. The hope is back, but we're still piecing together the situation. What happened out there? What did we just survive?" Darnell took a breath, his thoughts briefly flashing back to the destruction they had faced. "General, we faced the full force of the alien fleet. It wasn't just a skirmish. They came in full force, expecting us to surrender. But the hope, we had a weapon, a last-ditch weapon, one that we've only just begun to understand. It worked better than we could have hoped. We hit their command ship, and that was enough to scatter their forces." General Hawk's eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped slightly. "What kind of weapon are you talking about, Captain? Do we have access to it? Can we replicate it?" "We don't know yet," Darnell admitted. "We don't have enough data to fully understand how it works. The weapon drained almost all of the Hope's power reserves, and we're in no shape to launch another attack right now. But it's clear that it's something beyond anything we've ever seen. We need time to study it. We need resources to replicate it before the aliens regroup." Hawk's face grew even more serious. "We can provide you with resources, but time is something we don't have. Our intelligence reports suggest that the alien forces are already in motion. They're reorganizing, preparing to strike again. If they know we have something like this weapon, they'll come back with everything they've got. This war, it's only just begun." Darnell felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. "I know, General. That's why we need to prepare. This weapon, it may be our only chance." "We'll send reinforcements and resources," Hawk said, his voice firm. "But Captain, you're going to need more than a single ship. You'll need an army. You'll need a fleet. Start preparing for that now. We'll give you everything we can, but you have to act quickly." Darnell looked out at the blue planet before him, the home they were all fighting to protect. "Understood, General. We'll start immediately." As the transmission ended and the screen went dark, Darnell stood silently for a moment, absorbing the gravity of their next steps. They had won the first battle, but now they had to fight a war. The aliens had laughed at humanity once, but that was before the Hope had turned the tide. Now, Earth had one final chance to prove they were not just survivors. They were fighters. They would stand, united and strong, no matter the cost. The future of the human race depended on it. And Darnell knew, deep in his heart, that humanity would not go down without a fight. Not now. Not ever.